got a desktop one, but
It must not be one of the clip-on ones, is it?
no, it's got too many little knobs. I don't know which one I'm supposed to twist and turn for what.
Man, you've been
There
in
we
this
go.
industry way too long not to know which knob to switch at this and turn at this point.
Yeah, so mine must be hopeless. That's the only thing I can think of. I also got a new thing that's supposed to track my face.
Oh, don't
But
use those. Are you
well,
serious?
it's mostly because it was the least expensive, like 4K, whatever.
Is that what you?
That
That's the camera you tell me that you got, right?
yeah, I got a new camera that's like a really high. It's 4K instead of whatever I had before, which was 960.
I don't think anybody noticed the difference. They won't notice much of a difference at all. Although I don't know.
Yeah,
We'll
maybe
see
not.
what the signal looks like a little bit, man.
We'll
Dude,
see.
it's been like
I can tell the difference. Like I turn it on, and I'm like, oh yeah, I can tell the difference. Like light makes a difference now, and all sorts of
yeah, I
things.
could.
So
You're right because I'm looking through the back of your window and you're not blown out back there. Although
right,
I don't
yeah.
want to see all that. I just want to see you. Can you pan your camera down? Like it's tracking your face and it's like,
Oh, let's see. I need to move this way. Let's put
oh
my
look,
head in front of it.
oh, it's moving with you.
Is that better?
Well, I'm trying to make you so the goal is to make you the same size in the image that I am, so that it doesn't look like
Oh,
he's big and he's really tiny and he's big.
that would be like if my camera was right here.
Yeah, something like that. There we go.
So I need. It's got. I need the little stand thing.
Oh, you don't have to stand with you.
No, my stand's at my office, but I'm at home.
Oh,
I'm at
that's
home
okay.
today. I could
Gas prices
probably,
again.
dude. That's
He's like,
gas
that's not even
prices.
a joke, fam.
It's not. No, I mean that's why I worked from home all last week because I got a big truck that I don't want to have to drive.
I don't want to spend the gas money. Bro, what has it been like 2 weeks since we had a chance to actually?
It
So
has,
we,
yeah.
we so I don't think people understand. Knox Unplugged is not like, oh, hey, let's go do a show. It's not that. It really is. David is talking to Jason, and so we haven't even had a chance really to talk and communicate even over the phone, which is all Knox Unplugged really is our phone conversations.
Yeah. Just starting to record the phone conversations.
Everybody's like, "Did I miss the show when it started?" It's like, no, there's no show. It's just it's unplugged. It really just me calling Jason, talking to Jason about stuff, and Jason's like, "Okay, you're gonna have questions. I'm just gonna be a little read up on what it is you're probably gonna have questions about, and then we're just gonna
Well, it's
go
mostly
for
like
it."
make sure I can get the names and dates right. I have a hard time remembering dates, so
Yeah.
I kind of think of it all like a big story, and so I think of it in terms of its order, not so much in dates. But when you
Me
start
too.
like the reason dates are helpful is you've got like, oh, here's the political story, here's the philosophical story, here's what's going on in art. You can line them up if you know the dates. So I mean, dates are important and they're helpful, but my memory doesn't work that way as
You know.
much.
So here's that really I started realizing how important it was to understand dates because you have multiple things happening in the world at one time, and so you
Yeah,
start synthesizing kind of where the culture is moving and how it's bending and what's going on. So you got the for instance, the London Baptist Confession, 1689, right? Well,
yeah,
1689, you had stuff going on over here, right? We got the
right.
1619 projects is right before that people want to talk about what's happening in America then. And there's all these points in time that helped me out was looking at the World War I and World War II and saying, wait a second, there was a lot going on in the world that led up to that and those moments themselves. And the 20s, understanding the 20s really helped me understand the 50s and the 60s, right? And then I was
Right.
able to understand the 70s and the 80s, right? And so, yeah, being connected to those dates is super helpful. I got to tell you, your camera is doing some weird. It's tracking you all the way down there.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's kind of cool and unnecessary all at the same time.
It's totally unnecessary, but it still costs less than the next most expensive 4K camera. So
You with all the geo, have you seen 2000 Mules yet from
no,
okay, it'll
I
make you
keep
not want
meaning
a
to.
camera like that.
Oh, because they can like
So
hack in and follow me
I
around.
just I just saw your camera see basically from where you're sitting right now at your eye level to go all the way down and see your feet. And a camera with that kind of view, range of view, bothers me if they can geo track you and all that stuff. They can just see everything. They can just see everything. So, um, so dude, your boy got the 5 foot shelf of books. Is that what you call them from
Yeah,
Harvard?
the Harvard 5 foot shelf of books.
Was it Charles Eliot who designed that?
Yeah, well, I think he was the president of Harvard at the time, and somebody was like, "Why should everybody go to Harvard?" And he said, "Well, for the education." He said, "But the education is available to anyone with a 5 foot 5 foot bookshelf."
I had to go grab my books real quick. So here goes 50. It's 51 books. 51 books, and I got all 51, and I got it for an amazing deal. And I started just there's one book, the 50th book, which is really weird. It says Introduction Reader's Guide Index. It's like you might want to make this book one, just maybe. And I started reading the
What did they
introduction to
put
this.
as one? Did they put Homer
It's
or
not a
Plato, Augustine?
I thought Benjamin Franklin was at one.
Oh, okay.
I have to go
So
back
it's
and
not. Yeah,
I
interesting.
should go back and look. I can't remember. I think his autobiography is at one, but it was really this is crazy. The editor's introduction reader's guide index to the first lines of poems, songs, and courses, hymns, and psalms, general index, chronological index. And he goes through, and in the first part of this editor's introduction to the Harvard classics, he talks about his purpose. And he says, within the limits of the 50 volumes containing about 22,000 pages. And I started thinking, it's like, going through this introduction, one of the first things that he starts talking about is basically the whole goal of people being educated was so that they can maintain their freedom that they had
Right.
handed down to them by their forefathers. And when I think about education, most of the time I'm not thinking about being free, right?
Right. I mean,
And
they called it liberal arts because it was about liberty. Right. It was the
right.
education of liberated people.
And so he basically said, so I was thinking, I was asking you, I was like, man, how long is it going to take me to go through all these that's a lot of books. Like I might get through, honestly, reading book cover to cover, I might get through 12 books a year. Right?
Yeah.
That's my goal. And I think I'm pretty average on that. But 51 in-depth books to get in your head and and so anyway, couple. So I asked you, I was like, man, how long is it going to take me to go through this? And you were like, what, 10 years or something like that?
Yeah. I mean, it's an education that you're after, right? This is
Ugh.
like if this was if we had our education system functioning properly, it's the high school and college education, right? So it's an 8 year
Uh,
education
so
that
this isn't
is
just a
the
college
actual.
education. This is
Yeah,
high
this is
school
high school
and college.
college, right? The or what it kind of what it should be. It's like that like puberty through the beginning of your career, or I mean, and careers work funny. Most people switch multiple times throughout their lives, and I've had a couple different careers now, and that's just how it works. But the uh, but kind of that kickoff into adulthood, from puberty to adulthood. That's the time when you're laying the foundations of an education, and the foundations of an education have to do with making you free to be a part of the great conversation of humanity. That a liberal arts education is. What uh, this is why Burke talked about one of the things that is the right of a free man is leisure, right? Leisure to be a part of humanity, right?
Mm.
And that's a distinctly Christian idea, that's for everyone. Or there was
Wait,
it's always that's always been a part of the educational process, but it wasn't for everyone until Jesus came along and said, actually, we're all free. Even a slave in Christ is free. The definition of a free man was flipped inside out and taken away from economics and made a soul word. It
wow.
has to do with the fundamental humanity, and that you want everybody a part of that freedom. So um, that idea was so revolutionary that we're still kind of we see how much that is resisted by tyrants. Tyrants don't want a well-educated populace. They don't want a population that knows their own story, that knows their own history, that knows um, philosophy, that knows theology. They want a population that goes to that gets tech degrees, that and great of the modern era, which is our metaphorical system, our cosmetical system, machine, computer, that sort of metaphor
Sorry, you broke up on me. You said that our government wants people who get tech degrees and educations based in what? Say that part again.
They want everybody to just go get a tech degree. Am I having internet problems?
Yeah, it's
I don't
hating me right now.
see.
Yeah, your signal is showing up really weak.
I don't see what um
It hates
they
you.
want. It does. It does. We just had a
It's
big
so good.
storm. We just had a big storm blow through. That's probably all that it is. Um, we want to populate populace with tech degrees, not with liberal arts education. They don't want people with free souls and free minds. They want people that can position in the machine culture or the machine of society, the machine of the governmental system. They want us to be thinking in terms of that. What's my place in them, in the machine,
Mm,
uh, so that be weak. Because they think they don't think in terms of individual souls. They think that they think in terms of the giant machine, right? The economy, that sort of thing. That's why you can have people go around saying like the economy's doing great, even though all of the people are dying. The people are starving. The people um,
right.
don't have enough gas to get to work. They can't afford it, and but they're like, yeah, but the economy's doing well. I don't understand. What's the look at the numbers? He's like, that's not you know economy. Thinking of economy as an act in the abstract, not as a collection of houses, which economy means.
Hmm.
It's the gather together, the households gather together, exchanging goods and services. That's economy is. As soon as you say you could, the economy's doing fine, but the people are starving, then you're not thinking in terms of humanity anymore. You're thinking in terms of some sort of collective result. And our metaphor system is machines, and it's slowly becoming computers as well. But we think people are machines. People are the government system is a machine, and people are pieces, cogs within the machine of the economy, the machine of and this is where what's funny is that then you have the argument being, well, is the machine the politics, or is the machine the economy, or is the machine some sort of political economy, right? And so if the machine is the the politics, then you're a socialist. If the machine is the economy, then you're a communist. If the machine is the political economy, then you're a fascist. But they all agree on the collectivism, right? They agree on the
Right.
the
Well, and
machine metaphor system.
the Republicans are falling right into that same
Mm-hmm.
reality too. Is like, oh, it's just a machine, and if we just need to get power over it, then we can control how it works, and we can fix it, the machine, right?
Right.
Instead of
Yeah.
saying, this is. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
Well, and I mean, this has been, I think this is one of the central errors that we tend to make, right? And then because when we then talk about, our souls, our humanity, or we don't even talk about our humanity, but we talk about, our souls or our spirit or our, the health of our mind, the mental health, all of those things have to do with abstracting and separating our mental health from our place in the
Uh-huh.
machine, right? And so you get this kind of ghost in the machine mentality where you're trying to take care of the ghost somehow, but you have to do that by separating it out from the machine, which is either our bodies or society or our jobs or whatever the machine is. You get this ghost in the machine metaphor system that we think in, that we assume, that we communicate in, and it's really destructive. Right? But we don't realize that it's a false metaphor system because everybody's using it, and so we bring we don't even have a way of communicating about what ought to happen or what we ought to be or what freedom really is, or because we're functioning, we think we're in a different poem than the one we're actually in.
And this is exactly how I've been feeling with the things that we've been talking about, and I don't even know what to call the new education that I'm getting in our conversation. Is I'm realizing I'm starting to feel like a madman because I'm screaming, this is not normal, this is not human, this is not the design, and everybody's
Right.
looking around like, turn your cog, you big dummy, you know. and and I'm like, and so I'm realizing that even the somewhat good education that I've gotten has been observing this machine, this operation, instead of thinking, because it's like, okay, how you get a job, how do you make money, how you provide for your family, and all those things are good, true, and real. But those things are coming after the type of human you become,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
With those,
Augustine breaks it down into the four aspects of an education, and the fourth one is that in economic prosperity, right? So the ability to prosper economically in the world it's a part of an education, but it's like the fourth part, right? It's the last thing because it's the least um it's not the it's the not that it's the least difficult. It's the least not even eternal. It's sort of it's just one part of it. It's not the heart of the education, right? A person that learns who they are, who God is, and what kind of place this is and where they fit, right? Which are the first aspects. Then knows how to serve their neighbor and prosper economically, right? It's the thing that flows out of understanding who you are, who God is, what kind of world he made, and how it fits together. Right.
man, we got to beat that like a dead horse. Who you are, right?
Right.
Who God is, and the kind of world that we live in. And so, but because of that, you get this, what comes next is just the natural flow. That's what that fourth one is. It's just in the stream of it's downstream of those things, right? It just
Right.
naturally,
Right.
you fall into, which is so here's when I got these books, I started feeling really stupid. I started feeling
I know.
really dumb,
I know.
right?
That's the problem
And
with reading. That's a
and I think I've said this before, but so when I started reading, I started feeling like, man, we don't know we don't know anything. We have
Yeah.
no, and it's not like, oh, we are the most technologically advanced generation ever in mankind, and yet we are in the process of we've completely deconstructing humanity. And
Right.
so then I start thinking about things like what James Cameron has did with his films, is trying to say, what does it look like when humans have forgotten their humanity and they've leaned now onto another form of, or another god to define for them their humanity and their help? Well, what you get is Terminator.
Right. Yeah.
You get that culture, you get that world, you get Skynet, right? Which is
Yeah.
which is a super scary kind of situation. So I want to play this for you. This is kind of long, but I want to play this for you. So there's this clip I was looking at, just kind of talking about like how dumb we are. Um and it's Mark, I don't even know how to say his name, but Mark Berlin. And he's
What I don't understand is how
Can you hear that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
how is it that on the 2001 NAEP history exam, 52% of high school seniors chose Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, or Fascist Italy as our ally, not the Soviet Union?
Hi, I'm Nick Gillespie with Reason TV.
Yeah,
I'm here
yeah.
today with Mark Future. In fact, there's
Hold on.
even a second
Means this to most.
premise of the book.
Digital culture means this to most teenagers. It doesn't open them up to the great big world of ideas and artworks and documents and politics and foreign affairs, which is all out there on the internet. The potential is there. Instead, it gives them what teenagers really care about: other teenagers, access to one another. They're not going to the Smithsonian Institution website. When Nielsen ratings examine the most popular websites for young adults, 9 out of the top 10, teenagers, 9 out of the top 10 were for social networking. 55% of high school students spend less than 1 hour a week reading and studying for class. They spend 9 hours a week social networking. And this is what brought me into this work. Studies of leisure habits by young adults. And one thing we can say is that the leisure reading young people do, the visits to museums that they do, the library visits that they do, those have gone down. And that's just natural, because the menu of leisure options for teenagers and young adults has gotten bigger. Reading has a smaller portion on the menu that they have. And when you go into the average 15-year-old's bedroom now, it's a multimedia center. Yeah, there are a few books up there on the shelf. There's the laptop, the cell phone, video game console, BlackBerry, iPod, and all those diversions give them something a lot more compelling than the story of Antony and Cleopatra and Caesar.
Okay, so this is 13 years ago, bro.
Oh, that's what I was gonna ask when that was, because he said BlackBerry. Like, even
And
I
you see
know that BlackBerry.
MySpace is up there. Yeah, you got MySpace up there and the whole nine. This is 13 years ago, and this video goes on long, and he starts going on basically to describe that the fact that people are reading, but they're reading inside of their own peer bubble, right? So
Yeah.
one of the things that social media has given us, I don't care who you are, social media is giving you a chamber of your own voice that bounces back to you. And so whatever
Right.
you want, whatever you engage in, it is just sending all that content right back to you. So you can be like, yeah, my thoughts are out there and I'm in the right vein of things. But when you go and you start reading yesteryear's books, it's realigning the whole world for you in a different culture, in a different time, in a different era. It makes your brain, it gets you out of your own echo chamber,
Right.
And part of what happened when I saw with 2020, that I always knew there was an echo chamber, but then I saw just how massive that echo chamber was, not just on the left, but on our side too.
Yeah.
I wasn't
Yeah.
finding anybody really in my circle that really disagreed with me. I everybody really liked what I had to say. And I'm like, wait a second, this isn't right. So I had to go and find, how do I get out of this echo chamber? And books don't have the same algorithm and luxury that social media and digital platforms have. It's not gonna build it towards you. It's gonna be what it is, and it's still, it's not moving. It's wooden,
Right.
right? Unlike the current situation that we have now with social media, it'll move and manipulate. It's like water, it'll mold and find the people that, and I just thought, like, so even if Mark is right that, hey, we have way too much social media engagement, and so we're losing out on um broad the conversation culturally. If they did decide to get the education that he wants them to have, they still would be missing out on the broader, larger form of the conversation because of the
Yeah.
type of education that they're getting.
Right. Right. Yeah, because just going to a museum doesn't suddenly make you a part of the conversation. You have to have other people that also have the education to be talking to, and that
Right.
it's almost unavailable. I mean, what's crazy is now the possibilities of conversation are amazing. I can have
Right.
conversations with people all over the world. Uh, I was reading. I got a new book recently, a fairly obscure book of older poetry, and the person that wrote the introduction, I saw was a professor in London, and I went on Twitter and found her handle and was able to message her with a question that I had about this book of poetry, right? And she's one of the world experts on Charles Williams, who wrote the poem. And I thought, man, the the ability to communicate is there. People just don't know the terms of the conversation, and so they don't know. There's no on ramps. There's very few recognizable on ramps to people into the conversation because they don't know it's been going
Mm-hmm.
on for thousands of years, and and they don't understand the humanizing effect because they've never experienced it. Right? I mean, that's how most of us are. We've not experienced what it is to actually be educated about anything, right? We bounce through um, half formed thoughts. We
Mm.
incomplete sentences, and form opinions and think that our opinions are of value because we put them out there and we get likes. They took the dislike button away from Twitter because they
Right.
realized it was hindering the kind of conversation that you can actually have on Twitter. Um,
You must be
so
reading my monologues. Is that where you're talking about half done sentences and making? You're right about that though. That's one of the. I mean, yeah. So the thing that I'm noticing is that, okay, so the importance of education is essential. Um, the kind of, we don't get freedom apart from that. This part of the Great Commission is go make disciples, baptizing and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded, right?
right,
And so there is a need for regenerated folks to be educated. Right. and
right,
and and that perpetuates, it teaches you to walk in the walk properly in the call that God has given to you, so much that you are properly acknowledging your gratefulness for the work of Christ through obeying the education that you've been given, right? So
right.
you can be regenerated, and you need to have an education. Say, how do I live now? How do I walk now? How do I observe now? you
Yeah.
know
Well, and even the studies on literacy. So to be able to read the Bible, you have to be literate, and
mm,
the the studies on literacy, and one of the main people that has studied literacy is the Bible translator. I can't remember. There's Wycliffe Bible translators. Then there's one other major Bible, but they've both done studies in literacy because they realized even getting the Bible into people's language, where they were getting the New Testament into people's language, and then they would, start introducing it while they worked on the Old Testament, and realized that the people weren't literate enough to receive it, and so then they would um, go and teach language lessons, reading lessons, and they realized that you actually can't be literate unless you're familiar. I think it was 30 books was the minimum, right? Unless you were conversant in 30 books, you couldn't read the
Whoa.
Bible, right? And so they realized it's not enough to just translate the Bible. So now, if they get a written language, um, as they're developing written languages, they get a series of books that they put into the language, never just the Bible, because you need a certain number of books. Even to read the Bible, you have to be conversant in other books besides just the Bible. Now, because the Bible is actually a library of 66 books, there's it's one of the most helpful things when it comes to literacy, because you've got every different kind of literature in there. You've got the broadness and the breadth and the depth, and the interactiveness within the texts that encourage literacy. I remember, I'd taken classes in Greek and then Bible and all sorts of things, and when I entered I started college a little bit later in life. Jumped in. I was 24, I think, when I finally jumped into college, and so jumped into a philosophy degree, and I had a professor say, this was in confidence, when I was getting ready to graduate, but he said I started to realize early on in my career that I could tell if it was going to be a good class or a bad class based on the number of Christians that were in it, because Christians are the only ones left that know how to submit themselves to a text.
Because of exegesis.
He's not a Christian philosophy professor. He is a Stanford professor of philosophy. He just said, but it's about entering into this conversation, and no matter what you're studying in philosophy, you're stepping into a conversation that's already going, right? So before you can actually enter the conversation with any sort of intelligence, you have to first submit yourself to a text, come to understand it where it is in the conversation, understand who he's arguing with, what he's arguing for, and then you can enter into the conversation with some sort of intelligence and add to the conversation. We've all seen people that don't listen well, but they jump into the conversation anyway. You talk to somebody who doesn't let you finish sentences, but then responds. And you realize, no, that's not a conversation, that you're not getting anywhere with that person. That
we are that generation.
We
That's
are that generation,
are.
right? He'd been teaching for a long time, and he just said Christians know how to do that, right? They know how to honor a text, come to understand what it actually means before you interact with it. And so he would, and when I was a philosophy major, it's a medium-sized school of philosophy. There were 4 Christians, myself, one other Reformed guy, an evangelical guy, and a Roman Catholic. And it was really interesting. We would go out for lunch. We would argue about theology and argue about Calvinism and Arminianism and sources of authority and the Pope and Mary and all sorts of things. And then we get into class, and it was so obvious that it was us versus everybody else that it was like, yeah, okay, we're actually all the same. I get that we're different,
right?
But in that setting, you've got atheists and agnostics, a lot of Nietzscheans and people that get really into Eastern philosophy and all sorts of things. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the difference between an Arminian and a Calvinist look really small. Like, yeah, all right, brother, let's link arms and go to war. So.
Yeah. When that's, I think we're back. I think that's when you're in the you're in the trenches when like
Yeah,
you
right.
have to have, and you're like, or charismatics were the one leading the charge. Oh, great. So
Right.
grateful for them.
Right.
But I'm like, that was just a testimony to like all these reform folks ain't got no backbone. Like the charismatics were the one leading the charge.
Right. Right.
So
Right. And
here's part. Go ahead.
well, I was just gonna say, and that's that kind of fire is when the Lord sends it, it's a blessing, and you just say, oh, okay, now we have. You look around and you say, okay, here's the group of people that stood under the pressure. That's good. That's good to know. These are the guys that are gonna be here. When we go to the if we go to the stake, those are the guys you want to know where they are, so you can link arms and be ready.
Here's what's really getting at me right now. I was watching a documentary. This is back to our education stuff. I was watching a documentary on 9/11. I believe that it's on Hulu. It's called A Day in American History. 9/11, A Day in American History. And this is the most brutal documentary I've ever watched before in my life. Most brutal ever. It's the best documentary too because it's all true, but it's along with an 11 museum. They did it. It is brutal. I'm watching because I was dehydrated because my eyes were leaking so much. So I couldn't finish past the second episode. And I was watching some of this with my kids, and they were watching Daddy Ball because it was crazy. So it's an amazing documentary. What I realized though, watching that documentary, the firefighters that came to the towers while it was still up, I've said this on the show, but they were different type of men. Were a different era where I said that on the show that they probably justice culture that was and said some weird things and we would probably be like, yeah, you can't talk like that, you can't engage. But these were the kind of men that when the rubber meets the road, they climb and they save you, right? Like that's kind of man that these guys were. And so I just was watching that. I was like, man, I don't think that we're making those type of human beings anymore. And I said that last year. And then because watching 9/11 people ago now, so people were forgetting. And my kids didn't even know really what it was. They've heard it before. So there's just this gap there. And I'm like, man, I got to teach you guys these things. But I'm saying, the education that we have isn't making the kind of man like that anymore. But it made me think, what is the education that we have making, period? What is it built? And we're back. Have no idea what's going on with that. That is weird. I think this must be so important that it's just getting. Anyway, so I think the last thing I was saying was that we have. So after watching the whole, watch of the documentary, and observing the kind of men that those guys were versus the kind of men that we currently have, even watching what happened in Uvalde.
Yeah.
It's kind of proving the point. The thing that has, I'm watching not only those things when it comes to moments of bravery, but I'm watching the kind of things that we're creating and the way that we're trying to push them on everyone else. We're not, the way our education is now, we don't build things that have substantial value for our neighbor. We build things that are almost like clickbait. They have to have it. They get it, and it never lives up to the reality of what it is that they get, right? And that's and that's not an accident. I think you have to trace that all the way back to the type of education that people has. When you look at the fruit of something, we talked to Urin Hazani, and he said he thought that everything that we're facing in the culture right now comes back to the education that we started getting in government schools, right? And I think
Right.
he's right about that. If you want to see the fruit of something, all you have to do is look at the kind of education that people had, and then you just wait a few years and say, well, what do they build with that type of education? Because that's going to tell you the substance of what type of education those people had.
I
Did I lose you?
the no. You- I, I think if you look at,
Oh, okay.
we were talking to you mentioned the war, we talking a lot about World War I, World War II. You look at the change in architecture. I mean, literally the way things changed in terms of what we built architecturally, and it's incredible to have the sudden shift in architecture that one in Europe and World War II in America brought about. Um, every single government building that people hate was built after the wars, right? That there was something that happened that caused us to literally change the kind of building that we built for um, that that kind of change in the lived in caused us to build a new kind of building, to build new kinds of buildings that people would have laughed out of the room, 20 years earlier, suddenly are the ones that are winning the giant government contracts and the university contracts. You look at old universities and what they built versus new university buildings, and you realize, yeah, something has changed because the what we build is so different. Not just the people, the physical
Right.
spaces that we build really have shifted and changed. And I mean, and architecture is the externalization of our cosmology, right? That's what architecture. That's what it is. It's cosmology in stone. It's or steel and cement. It's a modernist building. So it tells us what kind of creature we think we are, what we think we're doing, what kind of world we think we live in when we every time a new building is built. And modernist architecture is a result of the modernist worldview, right? It's a result of the modernist cosmology, the modernist philosophy. It's Gnosticism. I mean, modern architecture is Gnosticism in stone. So our education means something.
But work that out for me. When you say it's cosmology in stone, what do you mean?
Well, modern architecture really grew out of the movement that started in Germany and in Italy as well, during as fascism was on the rise, and Germany as Nazism was on the rise. You had a number of architectural movements, modernism, the Bauhaus movement, Italian futurist movement, the minimalist movement, brutalism, all these different movements that now we see of all over the place. And what it was it was a change in the way that people, the kind of creature that people thought they were building for, right? So you had in the Middle Ages, they thought that they were building for human beings who had a series of different responsibilities and jobs to do with their life on behalf of God, right? They were God's representative on the earth, and so you built them a particular kind of building. You built houses for them that they could raise families in. That was the purpose of the house, was to raise kids, to enjoy, for husbands and wives to enjoy one another and have fellowship and communion, right? Well, you get to the Bauhaus movement, the brute and brutalism and minimalism, which were they said, well, what do we need? We need housing for the newly emerging modern man, which, and Gropius called modern man a sexually liberated social monad. That was, he said, that's if that's what you're building houses for, or if that's what you're building space for, sexually liberated social monad, you're not going to build single family dwellings where you have a, a, a bed, husband and wife, and then a bunch of small bedrooms for the kids, and a living room that was designed to have a library, and a kitchen and table that were designed for feeding and fellowshipping around. Right? That, if you instead built the Chicago projects, right? That's what he was, the designer of the Chicago projects, right? The Philadelphia
Wow.
projects, right? He built the projects, and he said what he's hoping to do was so they've knocked down, and the government paid for all this. They knocked down entire neighborhoods of single family houses that were filled with families, Latino families, and in their place they put these giant, what they called worker housing. Realized they weren't, that when they called it worker housing, the People's Communists alarms went off, and so they stopped. So they started calling it affordable housing.
Affordable housing. I
Yeah,
know that term. Oh, I know that term.
housing.
Affordable
Yeah.
housing. Yes.
And it was blocks, square cubes, that were all the same. Every bed was the same. Everything was the same. And he said, because if you that if we are going to bring these people into the new phase of the evolution of the soul, or of the psyche of mankind, right, which is just Gnostic terminology, we need to break down the traditional, their connection to history and their connection to a time and a place, right?
Okay. Okay. You got to pause real quick, because don't forget that. I just got to say this. It didn't just happen to the ghettos, right? It didn't just happen. Suburbs got the same treatment, right? They just were better looking, but it was exact. There's a song. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, eventually, right? Eventually,
Yeah, eventually it bled out. Yeah. Anyway,
it bled out to everywhere, right? So but they were cement. They wanted, they called them machines for living, machines for living for living machines, right?
oh,
So the idea was that they were basically factory built. Everybody got the same thing, and if you were walking home, and you would stop thinking, oh, I've got to turn into this apartment because this one has my family in it. You could just turn into any apartment, because every apartment was exactly the same. So the apartment complex of exactly the same everything was his goal. And he was this whole movement was, we like to think that the transgender stuff is brand new, and everybody in these movements, they all got the same haircut. They would dress the men like women and the women like men. They would, they were, while designing these buildings, right? It was a very and you'll see, if you bounce around on the internet looking for evidence of it, the evidence is all there. The problem is everybody's celebrating it. They're like, look, they were way
wow.
ahead of their day because they were transgender, and they were, they were breaking down all of the taboos, or so they would spend the morning breaking down taboos, and then spend the afternoon designing buildings for workers and for
That's
for
critical
government
theory.
buildings. And it really is. So it's, the modernist architecture is just sort of critical theory, that dissolved the idea that we needed to dissolve the connection, for modern man to emerge into its next phase of of psychic evolution, or the evolution of the psyche of modern man, that you needed to separate the masses from everything that gave them an identity, right? Their history, their family, their people group, so they there was no decorations, no anything like that, because it was all just about function. Functionalism was one of the big movements. The Italian futurists. So that was coming out of Germany and Italy. So, and Nazi is on the rise there. In Italy, where you had the fascism on the rise, the Italian futurist architecture movement, which has also been really, really influential, was growing and blossoming, and its whole thing was that the function the function was the place where the beauty was, right? So there was no decorations added. Instead, you didn't finish the walls and you let the pipes show, and that was the decoration. You didn't put up you didn't finish the walls on the inside, you let the brick show, and the brick was the decoration. And now because of the way God built the world and the way physics works, and you actually end up with some beautiful Italian futurist buildings, because to get pipes to work properly according to the way God worked, you end up with decorative looking things, right? End up with beautiful lines, and because you're trying to get the water to flow, and water flows along lines that turn out to also be aesthetically pleasing. But they were purposefully trying to undermine the aesthetics of Christendom, the aesthetic, the idea that you could have a unity and diversity within a building that was built to human scale for human purposes, and that would become the kind of place that people wanted to be in, because it was both beautiful and comfortable. They were like, no, that's a different view of mankind. That's a different anthropology, a different definition of humanity. They believed that people were machines, and so you didn't to decorate for a machine didn't make any sense. It gave people a false sense of identity. To have decorations, they needed to understand their function and their place in society. They were a cog, right? The thing is, nobody wanted to live in any of these places. They ended up knocking down many of the buildings, because they just became places filled with crime, right? Places filled with just everybody with a family moved away, and so all that you had left were crack dealers and prostitutes, and we don't look back and say, well, maybe we made a mistake. We shouldn't have knocked down those neighborhoods, right? We say, let's throw another $100 million at it and build a new set of projects. And right, let's not treat them like people. Let's continue our social experimentation.
And this time, let's call them lofts.
Well, that's the thing is, so the whole idea of worker housing, lofts were a big part of it. The only people that could ever afford it, though, were the ultra rich. I remember growing up in the 80s thinking, if you ever make enough money, then you get to move into a loft.
Condo.
Now I'm like, okay, that literally is the. They would build these worker housing things, and the chairs were all like $5,000 because they were the way they had to be built. And so the only people that could ever afford to ever put up any of the modernist architecture were governments, right, who have guns that can take away people's taxes. Nobody would pay for these on purpose unless they were under compulsion, right? So you had universities and governments that paid for all of this. And here's what's crazy. So you had things, you had like purism was one of the movements, where they would say it is all has to do with the vision of the architect, right? And the person that's paying for it gets no say. So they would only take a job if they were given complete freedom. But then they didn't take into account the people that were actually going to use or live in any of these buildings, right? So, which is they were the Gnostic guru with the special knowledge about the next phase of the psychic evolution of man, and they were going to bring it into being by force, and that's why they needed government funds. That's why it's government buildings that are ugly. That's why it's state university buildings that are ugly, right? Because those money gathered by, and so you go get because nobody's going to hire an architect who says, I'm a part of the brutalist movement, for example, to build your house for you, right? That's something that only a government would ever think was a good idea. Right, so the and then you had things like functionalism, which built everything had to have a flat roof, and it didn't matter where you were, and so you'd have all these buildings with flat roofs. The Minneapolis projects, I believe it was the Minneapolis projects that they built with flat roofs, which if you know anything about Minnesota, you know that you're going to get a bunch of snow up there and it's going to melt, and that's the flat roof is the least functional roof you could possibly put in, but that's what they did. So, but then eventually, once these government projects, um, normalized modernist architecture, you started getting skyscrapers built in a modernist style. They're just steel beams, glass, all the way up. That no longer that are in that purist style that says, what's this for? This is a giant building for office workers, and so it can't have anything that makes it nice or beautiful or pretty. It has to just be functional, period. And so you get skyscrapers, which are our cathedrals, right? Those are our generations, our society's cathedrals. They're the ones that are built, that they stand out, they form the skyline, they define a city, they tell us what that city's for. And it turns out that economic machinery is the only thing we're willing to build a cathedral to. So,
yeah, when you walk inside of them, one of the things you do, you look up just to see how transcendent it's supposed to look, right? Like, and how small you are in the environment and how big the building is. So that's what cathedrals are supposed to do, is to remind you of who God was, who you were, and the type of world you live in, right? And so now the modern form of cathedral, there is no God. You aren't really important at all, and we're in charge.
Right. But the thing is we believe that so if you ask somebody to imagine, picture the earth, they're going to picture the earth from a place that they have never been. Right? They're going to picture the earth from space. They're going to picture you say picture the earth to people. They don't go out and think, okay, well, I'm picturing the ground.
Oh, wow.
In my backyard,
yeah.
I'm picturing the ground on my farm. I'm picturing, they're going to picture the earth from a perspective that they have never actually experienced. They're going to picture it from an astronaut's perspective or from outer space. Right? And even the fact that we call it space, tells us what we think, what kind of universe we think we live in. Right? Our imagination is filled with a cosmology, a universe, a universal picture, an imaginative picture that is mostly empty, dark, cold, destructive, and if you ever got there,
Random.
it would kill you. Random, right? And so a skyscraper is actually not a bad picture of that universe, of holding back the chaos of that universe with the strength of steel, the strength of glass, the strength of steel beams, that's what it takes we don't believe that this universe is a cathedral, and so we don't build cathedrals. Or we don't believe that this universe is a place of integrated unity, of beauty, that is designed to be filled with music, and so we don't build acoustically sound buildings. The kind of universe we believe we live in will define what kind of cathedrals we build, what we build cathedrals to, for, and how we design them. Right. So in the medieval world, where they built the greatest buildings ever, the cathedrals, they believed that God had built a cathedral and that they were living in it. Right. They were, and the earth was at the bottom. It wasn't anywhere near the spires and the best places of the cathedral. The earth was sort of the cement at the bottom of the cathedral. But when they looked up, they imagined that their imagination was filled with an understanding of the cosmos, that it was bright, it was full of music, it was full of liturgical movement and dance, and so that they and it was a unified whole, right? That all of the diversity that filled the universe actually fit together into a unified whole as a universe, and the orbits all worked together. Everything was in motion, but it was in motion in a unified way,
harmony,
not in a random way. Harmony, yeah, it was filled with harmony, and so they built buildings that were filled with diversity and harmony, or a unified whole that was diverse, harmonious, had all sorts of small details, but then you could step back and see that the small details fit into a larger whole. That they would give an architect the freedom to build to build one of the corners, and they got to put in whatever they wanted. They could put in a sculpture, they could put in a carving, they could put in whatever they wanted, but knowing that then would be a part of a larger whole, and individuals got to put their mark on it, because that was the kind of universe we lived in, where individuals had a place that they fit, that they Walter was it Walter Gropius, he had this manifesto about the change to modern architecture, and while he was writing it, he wrote a friend, and he said something along the lines of, "My life is suspended in thin air, like Muhammad's coffin." Right? That he felt like a ghost, and he just admitted it. Right? He's like, "I feel like a ghost that doesn't touch the earth. I live somewhere halfway there. I can't find my way down, but I can't find my way up." And he's the one. He's the one that wrote the defining manifesto on modern architecture.
Right.
Right. So, and I mean, the fact that they're having to write manifestos on architecture, there are people that win architecture awards now that never build a building. They draw drawings of buildings.
It's in their head.
Architecture awards. Yeah, it's all in their head. The take on what a building is for has been changed so completely, because what kind of world we live in and what kind of creature we're building buildings for, that has shifted and changed what we believe about that.
Okay, so
I mean, this is why we build such terrible churches now. But
okay, we'll get there.
Ugly buildings.
Okay, yeah, no, let me process all this real quick, okay? Because, when I talk to you, especially start talking about metaphysics and Gnosticism, which is still the conversation we're having right now, I start realizing that I really didn't know what Christianity was. And it's been 2 weeks since I talked to you. And, I'd like to think that we're making some headway. I'm getting a little further along. I'm understanding a little more. Now I go into my own house and I'm thinking, Oh my goodness. The problem's worse than I thought. Because now I'm thinking about all the structures that I'm in, and I'm thinking about all of the place that I work, the structure that I live, the environment that I go to worship, and I'm saying, "Oh my goodness, the problem is worse. It's manifesting itself." This is what I was talking about with the firefighters and the education. It's
Yeah.
our understanding of the cosmos, our understanding of God, our understanding of ourselves is so messed up that we are creating this reciprocal. So when they made those ghettos, whatever humanity was in those people, the structure seared it out, right? So that
Right.
they begin to live and function in a way that wasn't tangible in reality. So they became square little boxes, and we got there first by the type of mentality and understanding of the world that we have, and then we built structures like that. And then whatever, so nature, this is why I think the future belongs to, this is going to just blah out, okay?
Yeah.
I think the future of the world belongs to blue collar craftsmen who have classical educations.
Mhm.
And the reason that I'm making it very much blue collar is because they are the ones who are working with physical, tangible items still. They're working with wood. They are working with metals. They are working with plastics. They're working with things that still touch down on earth, and they have to build from them. And so it only makes sense that things work a particular kind of way, because if you work it any kind of other way, we can't make the product that we need to work. So guys who are carpenters and guys who are mechanics and electricians and these people, they still have a very tangible reality of how the world works, just in the way that they do their jobs every day. But if they don't have the education that informs their work, then they're in trouble. But the ones who do understand, well, you got to build like this. And if that's true about construction and uh, framing, it must be true about people.
Right. Yeah.
Right? They're always so malleable. So those kind of folks say, I don't care what you do, a piece of wood is only going to bend so much before it breaks. And I don't care what you try and say, a man is never going to be a woman, and a
Right.
woman can't ever be a man, because the world isn't designed like that. But I'm starting to see that every those kind of people, I think, will hold the future. But the ones who are living in these structures that they aren't paying attention to, that they're not aware of, are being formed and instructed to act in the world a particular type of way and not even knowing that it's happening to them. And so I was fine understanding, like, okay, if we can change some people's minds and concepts about Gnosticism and just getting them back to understanding how the world, we're good. But we have a fight on our hands, because the very environment that we're in, you go downtown, any major city, and you lose the skyline, you lose grass, you lose trees, and it's all fake, right? It's just iron. And it's amazing living out here in the Northwest. I see hills and mountains and terrain and natural beauty, and it's like, how do we put that into what we do? And it's just it's a completely different attitude when I walk outside in Minneapolis downtown, and there's cars bustling by, and there's no trees except for where they decide to plant them. And and they're making this fake garden, and they're not building it like a real garden. And look, I'm grateful for all that, but there is a form and a function to that that's different than actual created order. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we have our work cut out for us even more than I thought,
Right.
you know? And so
Yeah.
go
This
ahead.
is why it isn't something that we fix in our generation. We can't think, I've got to fix this now, because this is like, I I was just talking to my wife about this, because I'm reading up on architecture, and I was, was reading about church architecture, and seeing the connection between the cosmology of my favorite poets and then the buildings that are built in their day, and were talking about it, and she and and she said something like, and how people think you fix it, right? And I was like, yeah, they think we go out and we got to build a building like the medieval cathedrals, and then we've got it fixed,
Yeah, that's right.
right? It's
Right.
like, yeah, but that's not. We can't. It wouldn't. And if we did, let's say we did get one built, it would be it wouldn't. People wouldn't know what to do with it. People wouldn't know how to deal with it. Right? It
Mm.
wouldn't work because people don't believe God, don't believe the church is God's cathedral, right? They don't believe God is building a cathedral, and so they don't want to put the church into one, right? We would end up building a basketball court next to it and worshiping there instead, because we wouldn't we wouldn't feel like we fit into it. Um,
Oh my
it,
goodness,
it
that's exactly what my old Presbyterian church did. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
it's
Exactly what
it's
they
a
did.
but it's a fittingness issue, right? If you don't if you look at the history of the church, and you see the ecclesiology, not talking high Middle Ages, right in the when the medieval church was at its most healthy, um, the 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 ecclesiology believed that God was in the process of building a spiritual cathedral. And so they started building cathedrals because that seemed like the place you would put a spiritual cathedral, right? And what I mean by that is that there was plenty of there was space within the church for all kinds of different people. There was you had um you might have you might have a um let's say you're in Spain, you might have a pastor, um, for in your local congregation that studied theology in Italy, it grew up in Africa, studied theology in Italy, and now is in a small town in Spain pastoring, right? That it was much more cosmopolitan, international. The church was expected to be international. They had a universal language that the pastors could all communicate in, and so you could have a German pastor and an African pastor and a pastor from England, all running working together in a cathedral, and they all just spoke Latin with one another. And um, the expectation was that you had a much broader, and then on top of that, you have people studying at different um, theological seminaries. I mean, they weren't called seminaries yet, but they're different schools of theology that learned different theological lingos, theological, and then would talk about it. Right? They didn't excommunicate one another. They would they expected other places to have a different take theologically, not on fundamentals, right? Not, but that they would bring something that maybe you hadn't thought of, right? And you would bring something that they hadn't thought of because they were raised in a different place, speaking a different language, and so they were going to bring a different perspective with them, and that was actually, and then you got into conversation with them, and that was how you um, over something like the or, over or under maybe something like the Nicene Creed. How do you understand this section of the Nicene Creed? How do you see it working out in the life of the church? How do you understand the working out of this aspect of the Nicene Creed in the life of the church? And that they would get into conversation expecting to learn from one another, because there was that broad cosmopolitan, multilingual, multicultural aspect of the church, and that the church was the place that was cosmopolitan, right? That was where you expected it, because God was building something spiritually equivalent to a cathedral, right? All throughout the whole world. And so then you say, well, where do you put that kind of spiritual people? Well, you put them in a cathedral that reflects that. We're broken up into a bunch of tiny denominations that are not in communication with one another, that do not benefit from one another's theologians, that do not benefit from one another's as interlocutors, as conversation partners, as debate partners. And what makes the difference? How do we define strong versus weak denominations, generally speaking? Right. Numbers and money. Right. And so we build buildings that reflect the kind of thing that we think the church is. So we build cheap buildings. We whenever you go into questions of raising funds for a new building, there's always people that complain about it's too expensive. You know, people didn't complain that building cathedrals were too expensive. They worked on it there in the afternoons after they got off work, because they knew that was the. I mean, some of these, the Middle Ages was, especially that right towards the end of the Middle Ages, leading into the High Middle Ages, it was an incredibly prosperous time for Europe. Europe was a combination of the technology that was. So when a new farm technology was developed, it basically would immediately spread throughout all of Europe because of the communication of the churches, right? So you have the steel tipped or the iron tipped plow ends up everywhere in Europe because of the monastic system. So somebody invents it, and then the monasteries immediately communicate to one another, hey, check out this cool new technology, this farming technology, right?
They posted it to the monastery. Like there's a Facebook.
Exactly. Right, like Facebook. And so because of the interconnectedness that Christendom brought to Europe, you had technological advances at rates that hadn't been seen ever in the world, because of the peaceful communication and because of the lack of rivalry, right? So I might be a monk in England, but maybe I grew up in France or I grew up in Spain, but my brother monk in Germany is not my rival. And so if I've got something that will bless him, I'm obligated by the law of love to share it. You didn't have that in the ancient world. If you had better farming equipment, you didn't share it because that person might turn out, you might end up at war with that person, right? So you don't have that same sort of.
Can I just hit pause right there real quick? I see the same thing right now in the Christian body, where if somebody has an advantage or they have been, they can see things really well with social media or algorithms or whatever, or they have an audience of a nice size, I've seen people hoard to themselves certain things because they don't want to have the competition in the market. And I'm just thinking to myself, and maybe I do it so much to a hurt, but I refuse to think that this is a kind of, if we're building the kingdom of God, then I can only build so much where I'm at.
Right.
And I need people on the other walls and other places to build and to grow. And so I don't have, if God has given me some sort of information or knowledge of how something works and how to be effective, to withhold it from my brother is only a pride issue.
Right.
And it stops the advancement of the kingdom of God going forth. Shame on us.
Right.
Shame on us.
I mean, depending on there's a generosity of spirit that God works into his people. Right?
Yeah.
That because he's been so generous with us. And that doesn't mean that somebody shouldn't be able to profit off of something they invented, right? That that all of that is the profit off of inventions means you get more inventions, right? That's a it's the same with, if somebody is getting paid for their art, you end up with more art. And so that's my wife and I committed really early in our marriage to buying art from artists directly to put on our walls, right? And so, sculpture and paintings and prints, we do a lot, not woodcut prints, and it's because we want a world in which where there's more art, right? And so rather than buying art from Target, we've committed to, and it's taken a long time to fill our walls. That meant, but it's the kind of world we want to live in, and so we buy art. We go out and purposefully go to art shows with money, planning on buying art, even when we didn't have much. We've always done that, but it's because that's the kind of world that you live in. You live in the kind of world that you pay for, and that's it's the same with poetry. With when you see young artists that are that are trying to get started, um, I'll 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 stop at all of the street musicians, and if they're selling CDs or whatever, buy them. And my wife, it used to drive my wife nuts, but I was like, well, yeah, but what kind of world do you want to live in? Right? She's like, yeah, but we were on our way someplace. I was like, yeah, but I want a world where we've got street musicians on every corner, right? I want a world filled with music in that way. And so, um,
I
I
promote
stop and
that.
listen, and promote it, right? So and to think, what kind of world am I buying with my money? I think is what God expects of us, and then you realize, well, God, look how generous God has been. What do I need to be afraid of? What do I need to hold? Why do I need to hold back? I mean, conservatives are the worst about not reinvesting their money into building a world that they want.
Yoram Kazani his book was on rescuing conservatism, or reimagining or rediscovering conservatism. Okay. And I think he's a part of the Edmund Burke Foundation or something like that. And it was amazing because
the Edmund Burke Foundation, I need to get that information.
Yeah, I know. I want to hit this. As you're talking, and you're talking about cathedral, I think it falls in the flow of God made a universe, and he's building his cathedral, and he's inviting man to model him in that. And I can't help but think that there's maybe I'm thinking about this wrong. I think it's about the cathedral of the church, right? That's a cathedral there. And I think about the cathedral of the home. Is that a right way to say that, maybe?
Or just what is a family, right? What's a home for, and what does God say that it is? And then how do you build the right kind of building for that?
That's what I want to get to, because the cathedral of the home, but like what kind of building do our homes need to be? Because I don't think that as we go forth I want to see a full reformation come all the way through, right? I want to go all the way to the civil magistrate, all the way up to, I want to see it come in our churches. I want to see the whole nine. I think a lot of it's going to have to start with our homes, individuals first. And we're going to have to see individuals build the kind of homes that model the type of people that go out into these other spheres and operate, right? And I'm not leaving out the influence of the teaching and the preaching of the word of God from the church, but we're going to have to take that and do something with our homes. And that's a very central place for me to think about. So when you start talking about your home, what kind of home do we need to be building and creating? So I guess we got to start, like, what is a family? What is it for? And then what kind of building produces that type of fruit? What does that look like?
I would say, rather than what kind of building produces that kind of fruit, I would say what kind of building is poetically appropriate for that kind of creature that it's housing. Right? So that's always the question, because what you want is something that your kids grow up and they look at and they say, these walls, this shape, this house, this is it. It's reflecting back to me who I am, right? It's and so we have been, my family has lived in apartments. We've been at, I mean, poor as poor can be, ran out of heating oil, poor, sorry kids, you got
Yeah.
to wear jackets till next month. That's what, I mean, and then we've had times where we had a good income, you get solid income. And every space my wife has made a hospitable space.
Mm.
She has looked at our kids and said, how do I turn this into a place where my kids show up and say, this is what it looks like to feel like I have a place, feel welcome in the world. And we have always had people over for meals. I mean, we had an apartment that literally had a hole in the floor so we could see into our downstairs neighbor's apartment. Right? That's the kind of, and my wife would turn these places into places where people would stop by on their way home from work just to say hi because they wanted to be there, right? And these were ugly, ratty buildings that were filled to the brim with the smell of hospitality. Um, that would they would she would fill up our table at dinner time in such a way that it didn't matter how many people showed up, we could feed them. And my wife is infamous for last minute adding somebody to the table, right? Um, and and that was the kind of home that she wanted our kids to grow up in. And so she looked at it and said, okay, this is the space that God has given us. I'll put a bookshelf over that hole into that, and then our downstairs neighbor would smoke pot and you'd get little puffs of smoke to come up through there. So we're trying to figure out how do we stop up the hole. Um, but it's a matter of how do you make this space what it should be for this kind of creature that is the home, for these kind of creatures that are little people, little humans that we're raising up to become who God created them to be. Um, and so that's so she always filled our house with lots of bookshelves, and so that we could fill our kids with books, and then a huge table. I mean, the first time we could buy it, we had hand me down furniture until we finally bought a table, where we built, or we and my wife got us this huge 8-foot by 4-foot table, and then she put benches around it because you can fit more people
Yeah.
in benches than in chairs, right? So thinking, well, what is it that we have here? We've got hungry souls. They're going to be hungry for food. They're going to be hungry for fellowship. They're going to be hungry for knowledge, right? That's what. So filling the house with those sorts of things. And as they grew, we now have 2 pianos, right? A piano on both ends of the house. We've got guitar hangers all in multiple rooms because my
Drum
wife
set.
drum set, because she started to say, okay, we got music, right? And this is something that we didn't have when our kids were little. We didn't have yet, but now the house is filled with music all the time, right? Because what kind of creatures are there? Well, they're the kind of creatures that are going to be worshiping God for the rest of their lives, and so that's going to take music. So watching the way my wife has taken whatever space I've been able to provide. Sometimes it's been little tiny apartments. Sometimes it's been big houses. She's always taken the space and turned it into the kind of place that our kids want to be. And part of that is just that generosity of spirit that is overflowing. But then that turns into beautiful places. You don't. You, there's my kids might run into a new idea when they go off to college. They're going to, right? They're going to run into new ideas as they go out into the world, but they're not going to run into the idea of new ideas because they've been surrounded by books their whole lives. They've been filled up with books and stories and their whole life. So running into a new idea isn't going to throw them off. They're going to say, wait, does it fit with what I know or not know? Because that's what I've been doing my whole life. That running into somebody that's funny and that laughs a lot is not going to throw them off. Somebody that's enjoyable. Running into people that are out of fellowship, as my kids have gone out into the world, that's the thing that strikes them.
Yeah.
They go,
no, I see that.
whoa,
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's not something that I know about. Families out of fellowship, right? Because they've since they were little, they've been taught to ask for forgiveness when they sin and been told that they were forgiven, and then the sin was set aside. They've been asked for forgiveness since they were little, since before they could say, I forgive you, they have been asked for forgiveness, right? When they were little teeny babies and you get frustrated with them because they won't go to bed, and you sinned against your little baby and you ask them to forgive you. Will you please forgive me? And then you talk back in their voice, I forgive you, right? You teach them from when they are just, and
that's why we baptize kids, people.
They do, right? Because you are bringing them into their identity that God has told them. God has said, I am their God, right? I am their God, period. Right? I am a God to you, and I'm a God to your children. And so you say, okay, let me tell you about your God. He has already promised that he's your God. He's already defined himself. He has bound himself covenantally to you. What was that? Who was the president of Westminster that wrote the Binding of God? Now I can't think of it. It's really great. This is on God's covenantal self-binding. It's a beautiful book, but why is it escaping me?
Hodge?
It'll come to me.
Okay, I'm just throwing out names now.
It's and that's what you have, right? That's the kind of creature that you have, that this eternal image bearer that is a little cathedral, right? That is God's little eternal cathedral that he will be building forever. He's made of words, and so you talk to them, and then you're brought in as part of the constructor, right? You're a subcontractor in God's cathedral project on your kids, right?
You better stop.
And that's what it says in Ephesians, right? It says, build one another up. It's about the way you talk to each other. It's a construction project, right? Build one another up. Edify, I think, is the word that is often used, but it's because they're an edifice, right? They're a little building, and so you're edifying them. You're adding to the edifice with your words, because they're made of words, right? So and that's why it's so important that you speak kindly to your kids, that you speak gently to your kids, that they know.
And you baptize your kids.
And you baptize, right? That you put the name of God on them, because he has said that he has claimed them as his own. So and Jason, that you surround them with the beauty of a home that's in fellowship, and then provide what your wife needs to be able to decorate well.
So part of when you were talking, I was like, yeah, man, but you still got a problem with the structure, right? Because the structure might not be right, so the building might be messed up. And so you're just talking about what you put in the building. But this is actually really good, because it actually models the current situation we're in, where we know how God has made the world. The structures that are around us that we're operating in aren't living up to the standard in which God has designed the world. And just like your family and my family have had to go to environments that actually weren't designed for us to be flourishing as human beings in.
Well, yeah,
we come into,
and you even have more kids than me. Like where you go into a house that's designed for 4 people, and you're like, yeah, except for I don't have 4 people.
We got 9 of us. How do you make that happen? But when you come into that environment, you're coming into, and we come into a fallen world with fallen structures that we have to come in and say, all right, what does regeneration look like? And so one of the things that I was listening to you say is, like, my wife says, all right, what did God put in his temple? How did God decorate his garden? He put music there. He put, food there, and he put fellowship and education there. And so we are going back to the garden, and we're putting, I love how you said that with the children. It made me think so differently. If we are subcontractors who have been, you can think about this with the talent too, where God's giving you these talents, and you look at your kids and like, okay, these are arrows, these are talents, these are something you're going to have to give back to God at some point, right? And you're like, okay, did you fill these kids the way that God filled his world? Right? Did you put all the things in there? Did you put the music in there? Did you put the beauty in there? Did you put the poetry in there? Did you put the education in there? This is why government education is absolutely intolerable to Christianity. Right? We should not tolerate it in any type of way, because it doesn't put in there the things that God has put in his cathedral that reflect back to him the beauty of his creation. It's completely antithetical to that. And so you got to look at it and be like, wait a second, what did God put in his world? And how do I take and put that in my kids? Man, that is, when you think about that, okay, what are the songs that we need to be singing? Objective beauty. How do I teach my kids what that is? Food, how to enjoy it, what to eat, what not. There's all kinds of things when you start thinking about it. You start thinking about this and you say, all of a sudden, nothing in your family life is mundane whatsoever. All of a sudden, everything becomes cathedral building, right?
Yeah.
and just like any good, beautiful cathedral, it's going to take time and energy and expense to be able to build something that's beautiful and lasts forever. Man, this is good, man. This is really good. I got to figure out, coming into I'm thinking about, we just bought a home and we're about to move. And I look at the house that we bought, and it's nothing that, it's going to need some work, but I'm so grateful for it. But it's so grateful. It's going to seat us much better than what we're currently seated right now. We have a place for two, and I think it's 2.5, 3 bedroom. We took a bedroom out and put a bathroom in. We got too many bums. And so we had to change some things up, but it's going to seat us so well. And I keep thinking about, okay, Lord, how do we take this structure and honor you with it with our children? Because form leads to function. But I think what you just did was not just something that we need to do in the physical environment. It's not just like, oh, we tear down a whole bunch of walls, because sometimes we can't. But what we do is we say, where do we put the drape set? How do we live in such a way in the world that God begins to knock down the walls and allows for things to expand, because we're living such a way where it's like, oh, you've been faithful with this little, well, I'll give you much. Right. You had no room for pianos and floors and holes in the floors, and now I'm going to give you 2 pianos, drum sets, and guitars, because you were always intending to build up my people this particular type of way. And it's not an accident that God decides to work in like that, and
Right. Well, yeah, now, so, you can see right behind me now, we've got a 16-foot table. We can have about 40 people
table
over for dinner, and that's, my wife and I built that 16 feet worth of table because he gave us this huge library room, and so we can have about 40 people over for meals, and I'll sit down and have meals now. Now our issue is we run out of plates before we run out of places to put people, which is a huge blessing that we haven't had before, right? God has continually expanded our borders to provide for my wife's desire to be hospitable, right? Because it's a good desire.
Yeah.
So, he keeps expanding that ability.
That's the other thing too, is that we forget, a lot of times people, I remember there was a huge Way of the Master, that movement was really about getting out and getting Christians to share the gospel, and people were concerned and scared to share the gospel. They didn't know what to say and how to say it. So the Way of the Master gave a format for people to be able to use when they go on the streets or wherever they were, to be able to walk someone down a particular path of perfect morality, right? And so they used the law and they gave the gospel, and that was great. And then it became that if you didn't do this, you weren't actually preaching the gospel out there. You weren't sharing your faith, and you're not a Christian. And then people in the movement said, okay, we also need apologetics to respond when people have something to say to us, because man, they'll come back with evolution questions and all this stuff like that. And so we got to be able to preach the gospel and got to be able to make it a defense. And we put these two things up, and everybody ran to apologetics. Everybody ran to how to proclaim the gospel, and nobody ran to hospitality. Right. And, and everybody missed the best apologetic comeback is women who love their husbands, love their families, and then shine the beauty of that home in such a way that that light says, "Ooh, what's over there?" And people are attracted to that light,
Right.
and they come down and they eat at the table and they taste the beauty of the gospel. I was and so we've forgotten that is the type of thing. Titus says that's the kind of thing that shuts the mouth of the people of the wicked, because they don't got nothing to say about that. Like, I've tasted that spaghetti, man. That mug is good. Them people on to something. I don't like what he says about politics, but I tell you something. That man loves his family,
Right.
and a man that loves
Well,
his family,
and like my kids are in fellowship with one another. They
and you,
love
that's
one another,
right.
and with their parents, and they'll and there's something really I was reading yesterday. This is Italian poet Petrarch, and so it's his songs.
Is he in my book of 50? I think he's in my book of 50.
He might be, yeah. He was really influential.
I think he is.
He invented the sonnet. I mean, and this is a good translation. This is the translation that I really like. This is 154, sonnet 154. Le stelle il cielo et gli elementi a prova. That's the name in Italian, which means something like the star, the ceiling, and the elements prove it. Are proof. I think that's what that means in Italian.
Man, I thought if you about to do this in Italian, it's gonna be a very long poem.
It's just the title. No, but this is
supposed to be beautiful, Jason.
Yeah, it is. And I think that it might be the star, the sky, and her elements are proof. I think that's what it means in Italian. Italian's just dirty Latin, so you can.
I'll let y'all have that fight.
Okay. The stars, the sky, the elements have put together by their art and utmost care this mirror of the sun, which has elsewhere nothing to equal it, this living light. The work is so sublime, graceful, and rare, it is too much for any mortal gaze, for love is raining down into her eyes, all grace and sweetness, always more and more. The air itself burns in this gentle ray with chastity. In such an atmosphere, both speech and thought are vanquished utterly. No wicked thoughts can ever harbor there, but honor only. Where else can one see beauty that banishes all base desire? And he's got two images, right? He looks up at the sky, and then he looks at Laura, his love, and he sees the reflection of the sky in her eyes, and he says, these two beauties, when I grasp them both together, it banishes all of base desires. It banishes he said it makes me want what's good and right, and it makes me, because I want to show honor, right? The beauty inspires in me a desire to show honor. And we don't have that anymore, really, anywhere in our imagination. We don't have space for that, but the reality is still there, right? When somebody comes over and sees a family in fellowship, it actually affects their desire. It's a thing they can't help but honor and want, even if it makes them angry, right? You see this sometimes. People get mad at something beautiful, right? It makes them angry, and that seems like a weird response, but it makes sense if it is affecting their desires and they don't want their desires affected,
Uh,
right?
that's really
So
interesting.
they defend with anger um, against it. I mean, I remember I was going over a bridge over the I-90 and during a sunset and looking at this back when I was an atheist and seeing the sunset and thinking, man, I wish there was somebody could say thank you to for that. That's beautiful. Right? The thankfulness was there. The thankfulness is an impulse, right? It's a response.
Mm.
Um, but I didn't believe there was anyone to say thank you to for it because I thought, and I used to always uh, this was part of my argument for atheism, is that if you were to inspect a the a sunset under a microscope, all it really is pollution that's being that is having effect on light or having effect on light rays, right? It's changing the speed of light rays. But if you looked at it under a microscope, it's just pollution, right? That's there's nothing really truly beautiful about it. It's an illusion. The beauty is an illusion. It didn't mean that when I saw a beautiful sunset, I wasn't moved and affected by it. I just,
That's
I remember, I mean, I
interesting.
remember thinking, man, I wish there was somebody to say thank you to, but there's not, right? Because the thankfulness just, grows up within us. We can't help that. And that's one of the things that makes why beauty makes some atheists really angry, or always trying to explain it away, right?
And that's yep.
Yeah.
That's getting
If you
past
look
the
at it
watchful
under a
dragons.
microscope, right? Exactly.
Yeah. So, and you know what? And that's part of our problem when we are arguing. We're arguing underneath the microscope. And instead of saying, "Hey, why don't you come over here and have a amazing smoked barbecue chicken
Right.
sandwich?" And they're like, "Oh,
Yeah.
I hate you, but this
Yeah.
barbecue sandwich is
We're having
amazing."
yeah. Yeah.
I know,
I mean,
isn't
now
it?
it is. Meat prices keep going up, but that was one of the tricks to be able to have huge groups of people over is you go buy the least expensive meat and just smoke it all day.
It's pork shoulders. That's what I do,
Pork
man.
shoulder, yeah, pork shoulder or chicken thighs. I'm just like,
Yeah.
I actually burned down my last barbecue because I packed it too full of chicken thighs, and then it lit on fire, a huge fire in the backyard, because I was trying to cook for too many people at once. I had
Well,
I had tipped them on their side and then like lined them up, and it didn't work.
that's okay. It just means God has to bless you now with something bigger to do some more
Yeah, now
cooking for more people.
for Christmas I got a new big smoker.